Max nudged her arm, his tail thumping once against the floor. Rachel stroked his fur absent-mindedly, her mind racing. She couldn't keep living like this. Couldn't keep waiting for the next crackle of static, the next chilling word. She needed to take action. She stood, holding the baby monitor tightly. "Come on, Max," she whispered. "Let's go check one more time." He followed her hesitantly, his body tense, his ears twitching at every creak and groan of the old house. When they reached the nursery, Rachel paused with her hand on the doorknob, taking a deep breath. She pushed it open slowly, peering inside. The room was quiet. Noah slept soundly, his little hands curled near his face, his breathing slow and steady. The nightlight cast its familiar glow, and everything looked exactly as it should. Rachel stepped inside, her heart pounding. She walked to the crib, looking down at Noah. He was safe. He was okay. She reached down and gently touched his back, feeling the warmth of his tiny body. Her fear eased slightly. Max stood at the door, still unwilling to cross the threshold. He let out a low, uncertain growl, his eyes fixed on the far corner of the room. Rachel followed his gaze, but there was nothing there, just shadows. She turned back to Max, her voice soft. "It's okay." But she wasn't sure if she believed it. She stayed in the nursery for a few more minutes, watching Noah, listening to the quiet. The baby monitor remained silent in her hand. No static, no whispers. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath. When she finally left the room, Max trotted after her, his tail still low, his eyes wary. Rachel closed the nursery door behind her and returned to the living room. She sank onto the couch, Max jumping up to sit beside her. She stroked his head, trying to calm both him and herself. She glanced at the baby monitor on the coffee table. The screen was dark now, the device turned off. Part of her wanted to leave it off forever, to never listen to that terrible static again. But another part of her, more practical, more protective, knew she needed to keep it on. She needed to know if something happened. With trembling fingers, she reached out and turned the monitor back on. The nursery appeared on the screen, just as she had left it. Noah was still sleeping peacefully. There was no movement, no sound, just the steady hum of the device. Rachel set it back on the table and leaned back against the couch. Max rested his head on her lap, and she felt a small measure of comfort in his presence. She closed her eyes, taking slow, deep breaths. The house was quiet again, peaceful even. But Rachel knew better than to let herself believe it was over. Not yet. Not until she knew for certain. That night, she kept the baby monitor by her side, listening closely as she drifted in and out of sleep. The static remained steady, the screen showing only the stillness of the nursery. Hours passed without incident, and Rachel began to think, just maybe, it was finally gone. In the morning, she woke to the sound of Noah's soft coos. The baby monitor was still quiet, still normal. She went to the nursery, smiling as she picked him up and kissed his chubby cheeks. He giggled, his bright eyes sparkling. Rachel carried him to the kitchen, where the sunlight streamed through the windows, bathing the room in warmth. Max followed them, his tail wagging. It felt like a fresh start, like the house was hers again. As she set Noah in his high chair and started preparing breakfast, Rachel felt a sense of calm she hadn't felt in weeks. The whispers, the shadows, they were part of the past now. And though the memories lingered, she was ready to move forward. Rachel knew she would never forget what happened. The fear, the sleepless nights, the overwhelming sense of helplessness, it would stay with her. But it had also made her stronger. She had faced it, endured it, and come out the other side. And now, as she watched her son happily play with his toys, she felt a surge of gratitude. Her house was quiet. Her family was safe. And that was all that mattered. As she sat with Max on the couch, Rachel thought about everything they'd gone through. She couldn't pinpoint exactly when things had begun to shift, but she was certain of one thing. She had grown stronger. This experience had tested her resolve, her faith, and her determination to protect her family. And she had won. Max nudged her hand with his nose, breaking her train of thought. Rachel scratched behind his ears, grateful for the loyal dog who had stayed by her side through it all. "You're a good boy," she murmured. Max wagged his tail, his eyes shining with affection. Later that afternoon, Lindsay came by with a housewarming gift. She handed Rachel a potted plant with vibrant green leaves, smiling as she set it on the kitchen counter. "I figured you could use something new and alive to brighten up the place," she said. Rachel laughed softly, placing the plant in a sunny spot by the window. "It's perfect, thank you." The two of them sat at the kitchen table, sipping tea and catching up. Lindsay told Rachel about a new project she was working on, and Rachel shared a few funny stories about Noah's recent antics. They laughed easily, the weight of the past few weeks finally lifting. "I'm glad things have settled down," Lindsay said, her voice sincere. "You deserve some peace." Rachel nodded, feeling a swell of gratitude. "I think we're finally back to normal." As the sun began to set, Rachel walked Lindsay to the door. They hugged, and Lindsay promised to visit again soon. Rachel watched her friend drive away before stepping back inside, closing the door behind her. That evening, after putting Noah to bed, Rachel sat on the couch with a book in hand. Max dozed beside her, the house quiet except for the soft hum of the baby monitor. She found herself smiling, feeling a sense of contentment she hadn't felt in months. The shadows were gone. The whispers were silent. The fear that had gripped her so tightly had loosened its hold, leaving room for hope and joy. Rachel glanced at the baby monitor. The screen displayed the nursery, where Noah slept peacefully. She set the book aside and leaned back against the cushions, taking a deep breath. For the first time in what felt like forever, she felt truly at home. And as she closed her eyes, Rachel knew that this house, her house, was finally a safe place again. A place filled with love, laughter, and the promise of brighter days ahead. "Dad, stop the car! There's something in the road!" Megan's voice cut through the hum of the heater, and her father barely had time to react before she threw her seatbelt off and shoved the door open. The cold air rushed in, making everyone in the car shiver. The rain had been relentless for hours, drenching the narrow road leading up to their rural Pennsylvania home. Puddles had formed in dips along the asphalt, reflecting the headlights like glass. But Megan didn't care about the rain. All she saw was a tiny, shivering bundle lying motionless in the middle of the road. Her father barely got the car in park before she ran out, her sneakers splashing through the growing pools of water. Her mother, Emily, gasped, reaching for the handle to follow, but before she could, Megan had already scooped up the little creature. "It's a puppy!" Megan turned, her eyes wide with shock. The little thing barely fit in her hands. Its fur was so drenched that it clung to its frail frame, making it look even smaller. Its ribs were visible beneath the matted, mud-caked fur, and its paws hung limp. It wasn't moving. "Oh my goodness!" Emily hurried out of the car, her heart pounding as she reached for her daughter. "Is it?" Megan pressed the little body against her chest, shielding it from the rain. "It's alive. I can feel it breathing." Her father, Steve, had come around the car, shaking his head. How did it even get out here? There aren't any houses nearby. He ran a hand through his damp hair. It must have been dumped. The thought made Megan's stomach turn. She glanced down at the tiny thing in her arms, its eyes barely open, its breath weak. The rain poured down on them, soaking her coat and dripping from her bangs. But she didn't care. We have to help it. Steve sighed. He was never one to turn his back on an animal in need. All right, let's get it in the car. We'll take it to the vet first thing in the morning. Emily hesitated. What if it doesn't make it through the night? Megan held the puppy tighter. Then at least it won't be alone. The ride home was silent except for the soft breathing of the puppy against Megan's chest. She refused to let it go, keeping it wrapped in her scarf. Her little brother, Tyler, leaned over from his seat, his face full of curiosity and worry. Will it be okay? He whispered. I don't know, Megan admitted, but we have to try. As soon as they pulled into the driveway, Emily rushed inside to grab a towel while Megan carefully carried the puppy into the warm house. She set it down on the kitchen counter, gently wrapping it in the towel her mother brought. It still wasn't moving much, but at least its breathing was steady. We need to warm it up, Steve said, rubbing his hands together. Let's get some blankets. Megan refused to leave its side, but Tyler ran off and returned with an armful of soft fleece blankets. Together, they made a little nest on the couch, placing the puppy in the middle. Emily brought out a small bowl of warm water and dipped a cloth in it, gently cleaning the mud from its fur. It's so thin, she murmured. I don't know how long it's been out there. Megan brushed her fingers over the puppy's tiny head. Its fur was a mixture of brown and white, though it was impossible to tell how much of the color was from dirt. We should give it a name. Tyler beamed. How about Lucky? Emily smiled at him, though worry still tugged at her features. Let's wait until we know it's going to be okay. The puppy stirred slightly, its tiny body shivering. Megan gently stroked its head, whispering soft reassurances. She could already feel something forming in her heart. This wasn't just any puppy. It was special. It had survived out in the storm, and now it had a chance. They would do everything they could to make sure it pulled through. Morning came too soon. Megan had stayed up all night, dozing on and off on the couch beside the puppy's makeshift bed. When the first rays of light broke through the window, she sat up with a start, checking on the tiny creature. It was still breathing, but barely. We need to go, she told her parents, her voice thick with exhaustion. Now. Emily and Steve didn't argue. They bundled up, wrapped the puppy in a fresh blanket, and rushed to the car. The nearest vet was 20 minutes away, and every second felt like an eternity. Megan held the puppy close, whispering to it the whole way. By the time they arrived, the clinic was just opening. The receptionist took one look at the bundle in Megan's arms and called the vet immediately. They were ushered into a room where Dr. Lawson, an older man with kind eyes, examined the puppy. The moment he listened to its heartbeat, his expression changed. He looked up, eyes wide with shock. This shouldn't be alive. Emily's hand flew to her mouth. Megan felt her chest tighten. What do you mean? Dr. Lawson shook his head. Its body temperature is dangerously low. It's severely malnourished. I've seen animals in conditions half as bad as this that didn't make it through the night. But this little one, he exhaled. It's a fighter. A surge of hope filled the room. Megan smiled down at the puppy, her heart swelling. Then we'll fight for it too. Dr. Lawson nodded. All right, let's get started. The next few hours were a blur of IV drips, warm fluids, and quiet prayers. The vet did everything he could, monitoring every breath, every flicker of movement. Megan refused to leave the room, holding on to the hope that if the puppy had made it this far, it could keep going. When Dr. Lawson finally stepped back, wiping his hands on a towel, he gave them a small smile. "It's not out of the woods yet, but I think it has a chance." Megan's breath caught in her throat. A chance. That was all they needed. She reached out, her fingers gently brushing over the tiny head. The puppy shifted slightly, its body still weak, but fighting. Megan looked up at her parents, at the vet, at the little creature that had found its way into their lives. They had saved it. But somehow, she felt like it was saving them, too. Megan didn't leave the puppy's side. Even after Dr. Lawson reassured them that it had stabilized for now, she kept a watchful eye on the tiny creature. It had been given warm fluids, wrapped in soft blankets, and placed under a heating lamp to regulate its dangerously low body temperature. Every now and then, a little shiver ran through its body, and Megan would stroke its head gently, whispering words of encouragement. Emily and Steve sat nearby, their faces still tight with worry. Tyler, his legs swinging from the chair in the corner, kept glancing up at his parents, waiting for any sign that things were getting better. The clinic smelled of antiseptic and wet fur, but none of them cared. All that mattered was the little life they had carried through the storm. Dr. Lawson returned after checking on another patient. He pulled up a stool, his expression serious but kind. "I have to be honest with you. We're not out of the woods yet. The next 24 hours are critical." Megan tightened her grip on the blanket wrapped around the puppy. "What do we do?" "You're already doing a lot," Dr. Lawson said. "Keeping it warm, making sure it's comfortable, but it's still very weak. I'd like to keep it here for observation, just to monitor its vitals closely." Megan looked at her parents. She didn't want to leave the puppy, not after everything they had been through. Emily placed a gentle hand on her daughter's shoulder. "Can we visit tomorrow?" "Of course," Dr. Lawson nodded. "I'll call if anything changes." Leaving the clinic was harder than Megan expected. Her arms felt empty without the little bundle she had held so close all night. The drive home was quiet, the sound of the rain now just a soft drizzle against the car windows. Megan stared out at the blurred countryside, her mind running through every worst-case scenario. What if the puppy didn't make it? What if they had found it too late? Tyler broke the silence. "Do you think it's going to be okay?" Megan swallowed hard. "I hope so." When they got home, she went straight to her room and flopped onto her bed, exhausted but unable to sleep. The house felt different without the tiny presence they had rescued. It was strange how quickly something could become part of your world. She had only known the puppy for a few hours, but it already felt like it belonged with them. The next morning, Megan barely touched her breakfast before rushing to the car. Steve chuckled as he grabbed his keys. "I don't think I've ever seen you get ready this fast." At the clinic, Megan nearly ran inside. The receptionist greeted them with a smile, already knowing why they were there. "Dr. Lawson is waiting for you," she said, gesturing toward the back. Megan braced herself as they entered the exam room. The sight that greeted her nearly made her heart burst. The puppy, still small and fragile, was awake. Its tiny head lifted slightly, its dark eyes blinking up at her. It looked stronger than yesterday, though still far from fully recovered. Dr. Lawson grinned. "Someone was waiting for you." Megan rushed forward, gently stroking the soft fur. The puppy's nose twitched, and it gave the smallest wag of its tail. It wasn't much, but it was enough. Emily let out a breath of relief beside her. Tyler clapped his hands together. Steve shook his head in amazement. Dr. Lawson leaned against the counter. I have to admit, I wasn't sure it would pull through, but this little one is a fighter. Megan smiled down at the puppy. Lucky, she whispered. Tyler's eyes lit up. Does that mean we're keeping it? Emily hesitated, glancing at Steve. They had always been careful about taking in pets. It was a big responsibility. But the way Megan looked at the puppy, the way it had survived against all odds, it was hard to argue against it. Dr. Lawson cleared his throat. It'll still need a lot of care, frequent feeding, medication, and plenty of rest. But if you're willing to put in the effort, I think it has a good chance. Steve sighed, but there was a smile playing at his lips. Looks like we have a new family member. Megan let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She cradled Lucky gently, careful not to jostle its delicate body. You're coming home, she whispered. Back at the house, they set up a cozy spot for Lucky in the living room, complete with blankets, a soft bed, and a little bowl of warm broth. The puppy was still weak, but its eyes followed Megan wherever she went. It was as if it knew who had saved it. Tyler sat cross-legged beside the bed, watching every movement with fascination. Over the next few days, Lucky slowly gained strength. Megan woke up early and stayed up late, making sure it was fed on schedule. She researched everything she could about caring for a malnourished puppy, from gentle feeding techniques to physical therapy for weak muscles. It was exhausting, but she didn't care. One evening, as she sat beside Lucky's bed, she felt a soft pressure against her arm. She looked down to see the puppy, tiny but determined, resting its head on her hand. A lump formed in her throat. It trusted her. It knew it was safe. Tyler grinned. I think Lucky loves you the most. Megan laughed, wiping at her eyes. I love Lucky too. Emily walked in, holding her phone. Dr. Lawson just called. He wanted to check in and see how things were going. Steve leaned against the doorway. Tell him Lucky's a tough one. Emily smiled. I already did. As the days turned into weeks, Lucky continued to grow stronger. It started wagging its tail more, exploring the house in wobbly steps, even letting out tiny barks that made everyone laugh. Megan still remembered the day they found it, so weak and cold. Now, it was full of life. One morning, Megan woke up to find Lucky curled up beside her on the bed, fast asleep. She reached out and ran a hand through its soft fur. It was warm now, safe and loved. Tyler peeked in from the doorway. Hey, Megan. Yeah? He grinned. Best rescue ever. She looked at Lucky, then back at her little brother. Yeah, she said softly. Best rescue ever. The first few weeks with Lucky had been a whirlwind of early mornings, late nights, and constant check-ins to make sure the tiny puppy was recovering well. Megan had never cared for something so fragile before, but with every day that passed, Lucky's small body grew stronger, and its once weak tail wags became more frequent. The little puppy had settled into their home as if it had always belonged there, but there were still moments of concern. One evening, Megan sat on the floor beside Lucky's bed, watching as the puppy took a few clumsy steps across the living room. It was still thin, though its ribs weren't as prominent as they had been the night they found it. Tyler sat beside her, eyes glued to the small creature that had quickly become the center of their world. Do you think Lucky remembers being out there in the storm? Tyler asked, his voice quiet. Megan reached down, stroking Lucky's soft fur. I don't know, maybe. But I think Lucky knows this is home now. Lucky looked up at her, ears twitching, as if it understood what she was saying. It had a way of watching Megan that made her feel like the puppy truly did know it had been saved, that it was safe now. Emily walked into the room, drying her hands on a dish towel. Dr. Lawson said we should bring Lucky in for a checkup tomorrow, just to make sure everything is still going well. Megan nodded, already making a mental note to prepare. She didn't mind taking Lucky to the vet, not when it meant making sure the puppy was on the right track. It was hard to believe that just a few weeks ago, they had nearly lost it. The next morning, Megan carried Lucky into the clinic, feeling a little more confident this time. The first time had been terrifying, but now things felt different. Lucky was alert, eyes bright, even letting out a tiny bark when they entered the building. Dr. Lawson greeted them with a smile, motioning for them to come in. "Well, well, if it isn't our little miracle puppy." Megan smiled, setting Lucky gently on the examination table. The puppy sniffed around, its small tail wagging. Dr. Lawson ran his hands over Lucky's frame, checking for any lingering issues. "Weight's improving, coat is looking better, energy levels are much higher," he mused. "You've been taking great care of this one." Megan felt a sense of pride at his words. She had poured so much time and effort into making sure Lucky had everything it needed, and hearing it was paying off made her heart swell. "There's still some recovery left, of course," Dr. Lawson continued. "But I don't see any reason why Lucky won't grow into a happy, healthy dog." Tyler, who had been watching from the chair in the corner, grinned. "Does that mean Lucky can play outside soon?" Dr. Lawson chuckled. "A little fresh air won't hurt, but take it slow. Lucky still needs time to build strength." Megan felt relieved. She had been so worried about every little thing, but now, knowing that Lucky was going to be okay, she felt lighter. Later that afternoon, they set up a small play area in the backyard. The air was crisp, but the sun was shining, making it the perfect day for Lucky's first real adventure outside. Megan gently placed the puppy on the grass, watching as it sniffed hesitantly before taking a few wobbly steps forward. Tyler clapped his hands. "Lucky's walking on grass!" Lucky paused, ears twitching, then took a few more steps before plopping down and rolling onto its back. Megan laughed, kneeling down beside it. "You like that, huh?" Lucky let out a happy yip, kicking its tiny legs. Tyler sat beside them, grinning. "I think Lucky is finally happy." Megan watched as the puppy rolled back onto its feet and looked up at her with those big, trusting eyes. She had worried so much about Lucky surviving, but now, seeing it enjoying the sun, the grass, the warmth of their home, she knew they had done the right thing. Over the next few days, Lucky became more adventurous. It still tired easily, but Megan noticed how it no longer hesitated before exploring a new part of the house or trotting after Tyler when he ran across the living room. One evening, as Megan sat at the kitchen table working on homework, she felt something nudge her ankle. Looking down, she found Lucky staring up at her, tail wagging. "You need something, buddy?" she asked, reaching down to scratch behind its ears. Lucky let out a small whine before hopping up onto her lap. Megan laughed, wrapping her arms around the small puppy. "Okay, I guess we're taking a break." Emily walked in, raising an eyebrow. "Looks like someone's getting spoiled." Megan grinned. "Lucky deserves it." Emily smiled. "That puppy is lucky to have you." Megan looked down at the small bundle of fur curled up in her arms. She knew that in reality, she was the lucky one. The weeks following Lucky's first outdoor adventure were filled with small but meaningful milestones. The once fragile puppy was now more active, more playful, and more curious about the world around it. Megan noticed the change in Lucky's eyes, the way they now sparkled with life instead of exhaustion. The small tail that had once barely moved was wagging constantly, always expressing excitement, whether it was for food, attention, or just a good belly rub. One afternoon, Megan sat on the living room floor with Lucky curled up beside her while she scrolled through her phone. Tyler was nearby, building something out of his scattered toy blocks. Lucky perked up, ears twitching, and let out a small bark. Megan glanced down. "What is it, buddy?" Lucky sniffed the air before scrambling to its feet and trotting toward the front door. It was the most energy Megan had seen from the puppy so far. Curious, she followed. Lucky sat at the door, tail wagging, looking up at her expectantly. "You want to go outside?" Megan asked, bending down to scratch behind its ears. "Hold on, let me ask Mom." She walked to the kitchen, where Emily was finishing up dishes. "Lucky wants to go outside again. Can I take him out for a little bit?" Emily dried her hands on a towel before glancing toward the door. "Is it warm enough?" "Yeah, it's nice out. I won't let him run too much." Emily nodded. "All right, but don't stay out too long. He still needs rest." Megan called for Tyler, and together they led Lucky to the backyard. The puppy practically bounced with excitement, paws pressing against the ground as if testing its own strength. Megan laughed, watching as Lucky took off in a series of wobbly steps, chasing after a stray leaf that had drifted across the lawn. "Look at him go," Tyler cheered. Lucky darted after the leaf, using tiny bursts of energy before stopping to catch its breath. The wind picked up, sending the leaf twirling into the air. Lucky tilted its head, watching it float away before spinning in a small circle, as if trying to figure out where it had gone. Megan crouched down and clapped her hands. "Come here, Lucky!" The puppy turned, hesitated for a second, then made its way back to her, wagging its tail. Megan scooped it up, pressing her cheek against its soft fur. "You're getting so strong." Tyler sat beside her, scratching Lucky's head. "Do you think Lucky will be a big dog?" "I don't know," Megan admitted. "But no matter how big or small, Lucky is part of the family now." Tyler grinned. "I like that." Over the next few days, Lucky's energy levels continued to rise. Megan noticed the way it moved with more confidence, the way it no longer hesitated before exploring new parts of the house. The once quiet, weak puppy had become a bundle of excitement, always eager to be around people, always watching Megan with those big, trusting eyes. One morning, as Megan was getting ready for school, Lucky trotted into her room, tail wagging. She smiled, kneeling down to greet it. "Morning, Lucky. You ready to start the day?" Lucky barked in response. It was the first time it had ever done that, and Megan felt her heart swell. She scooped it up and spun in a slow circle. "You're getting so strong." Emily peeked into the room. "I think someone's getting spoiled." Megan grinned. "Can't help it. Lucky deserves all the love in the world." Emily laughed. "You better finish getting ready." Megan gave Lucky one last scratch before setting it down. "I'll see you after school, okay? Be good." Lucky sat obediently, watching her leave. Megan felt a small tug at her heart, not wanting to leave the little puppy, but knowing she'd be back soon. That evening, when Megan got home, Lucky was waiting for her by the front door. As soon as she stepped inside, the puppy ran to her, paws skidding slightly on the hardwood floor. Megan laughed, bending down to scoop it up. "Did you miss me?" she asked. Lucky licked her cheek in response, making Tyler giggle. "Lucky was waiting at the door for you all day." Megan smiled. "Looks like someone's getting attached." As the days turned into weeks, Megan and Lucky became inseparable. Everywhere she went, Lucky followed. If she was studying, Lucky was curled up beside her. If she was watching TV, Lucky was in her lap. If she was outside, Lucky was right by her side, exploring the yard with endless curiosity. One afternoon, while Megan was doing homework at the kitchen table, Steve walked in with a thoughtful expression. "I've been thinking," he said, setting down his coffee mug. "It's about time we take Lucky to obedience training." Megan blinked. "Training?" Steve nodded. "Lucky is getting stronger, which means more energy. It'd be good to start teaching some commands early on." Megan looked down at Lucky, who was currently gnawing on a toy near her feet. "You think he needs it?" "It's never too early to start." Emily nodded in agreement. "It could be a fun experience." Megan considered it. She liked the idea of helping Lucky learn, of giving him the best chance at growing into a well-behaved, happy dog. "All right," she said. "Let's do it." A week later, they arrived at the local training center. The room was filled with other puppies of various sizes, all excited and full of energy. Lucky looked around, ears perked up, tail wagging slightly. A trainer greeted them with a warm smile. "Welcome. Looks like Lucky is ready to learn." Megan nodded, kneeling beside Lucky. "We're ready." The session started with basic commands. Sit, stay, come. Lucky was hesitant at first, but with encouragement, it started responding. Megan felt a surge of pride each time Lucky successfully followed a command, its little tail wagging in excitement. By the end of the class, the trainer clapped her hands together. "Lucky did great today. Keep practicing, and we'll see even more progress." Megan beamed. "Thank you." On the drive home, she cradled Lucky in her lap, stroking its fur. "You're doing so well," she whispered. "I'm so proud of you." Lucky nuzzled against her, letting out a small, content sigh. Megan smiled, knowing that this was only the beginning of many more adventures together. Lucky's training continued over the next few weeks, and Megan was amazed at how quickly the little puppy was picking up commands. What started as hesitant attempts at simple tricks turned into eager obedience. Lucky learned to sit on command, wait patiently for food, and even respond when called from another room. Megan felt a deep sense of pride every time Lucky completed a task, knowing how far the tiny dog had come from the night they found it in the storm. One morning, Megan woke up to the familiar sound of Lucky's paws padding across the wooden floor. She turned over, rubbing the sleep from her eyes just as Lucky jumped onto the bed and plopped down beside her. It wasn't a big jump, but for such a small dog, it was an achievement. "You're getting brave," Megan murmured, running a hand through Lucky's fur. The puppy wagged its tail and stretched before nuzzling against her. Emily called from downstairs. "Breakfast is ready." Megan yawned and sat up. "Come on, Lucky. Let's go eat." Lucky hopped down, trotting after her as they made their way to the kitchen. Tyler was already at the table, swinging his legs back and forth as he dug into his pancakes. Steve sipped his coffee while reading something on his tablet. Megan grabbed a plate and sat down just as Emily placed a small dish of kibble on the floor for Lucky. "So, I was thinking," Steve said, glancing up from his screen. "Since Lucky's been doing so well with training, maybe we should take things a step further." Megan raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" Emily wiped her hands on a towel. "He means socialization. Lucky's been great at home, but he hasn't had much interaction with other dogs besides the training class." Tyler perked up. "Does that mean we can take Lucky to the dog park?" Megan glanced down at the small puppy, who was happily munching on breakfast. "Do you think he's ready for that?" Steve nodded. "Only one way to find out." Later that afternoon, they packed up Lucky's leash. and a small bag of treats before heading to the nearby dog park. Megan had never taken a dog to a park before, and as they arrived, she was both excited and nervous. There were already several dogs running around, barking and chasing each other. Some were big, some were small, but all of them looked full of energy. Megan knelt down, adjusting Lucky's harness. "All right, little guy, let's take it slow." Lucky's tail wagged as he looked around, ears twitching at the sounds of barking and laughter. Megan slowly led him to the gated entrance, and once they stepped inside, Lucky hesitated. He looked up at Megan, then back at the open field where the other dogs played. Tyler leaned over. "Think he's scared?" Megan rubbed Lucky's head. "Maybe just unsure." A friendly golden retriever trotted over, sniffing curiously. Lucky stiffened for a moment before stepping forward, returning the sniff hesitantly. The retriever's tail wagged in approval, and just like that, Lucky's tension melted away. He let out a tiny bark and hopped forward, trying to play. Megan laughed. "I think he likes it." Over the next hour, Lucky ran, played, and explored the park with excitement. He was smaller than most of the other dogs, but he held his own, chasing after a group of puppies and rolling in the grass. Megan couldn't stop smiling, watching as Lucky experienced the world beyond their home. As the sun began to set, they packed up and headed home. Lucky, exhausted from all the excitement, curled up in Megan's lap on the ride back. Tyler grinned, stretching in his seat. "That was fun. Can we do it again?" Emily smiled. "I think Lucky would like that." Megan stroked the puppy's fur. "We'll definitely come back." That night, as Lucky slept peacefully in his bed, Megan sat beside him, thinking about how much had changed since the night they found him. He had gone from a shivering, weak little puppy to a strong, playful dog. And he wasn't just surviving. He was thriving. The next morning, Megan woke up to find Lucky standing at the door, tail wagging. She sat up, stretching. "What is it, buddy?" Lucky barked once and spun in a small circle. Megan chuckled, getting out of bed. "You want to go outside?" She grabbed his leash and led him to the backyard. As soon as she unclipped the leash, Lucky took off, bounding across the grass. Megan watched, shaking her head in amazement. This little dog had once been too weak to stand, and now he was running full speed across the yard. Tyler ran outside, still in his pajamas. "Can I play with him?" Megan smiled. "Go for it." Tyler picked up a small rubber ball and tossed it across the yard. Lucky's ears perked up, and in an instant he was off, chasing after it. Megan laughed as Tyler cheered. "He's fast." Emily walked onto the porch, sipping her coffee. "Looks like someone has a new morning routine." Megan nodded. "He's got so much energy now." Steve joined them, watching as Lucky brought the ball back to Tyler, tail wagging. "That's a good sign. Means he's healthy." Megan felt warmth spread through her chest. Seeing Lucky happy, strong, and full of life was everything she had hoped for. As the days went by, Lucky continued to grow stronger. He followed Megan everywhere, always eager to be part of whatever was happening. Whether it was playing in the backyard, practicing new tricks, or simply curling up beside her while she studied, Lucky had become an irreplaceable part of her life. One afternoon, Megan sat on the porch, watching as Lucky and Tyler played their usual game of fetch. The wind was warm, and the sky was a brilliant shade of blue. Everything felt peaceful. Lucky barked happily as he chased after the ball, his small frame full of energy and excitement. Emily stepped outside and sat beside Megan. "You really love that dog, don't you?" Megan smiled. "Yeah, I do." Emily squeezed her hand. "He loves you too." Megan watched as Lucky ran back toward them, tail wagging, eyes bright with joy. She knew that no matter what happened next, Lucky would always be part of their family. Lucky's presence in the household had become something of a daily routine. Every morning, he would wake up just before Megan's alarm went off, sitting patiently by her bedside, wagging his tail until she finally got up. He had a habit of following her around the house, watching her every move with deep curiosity. Whether she was brushing her teeth, grabbing a snack, or tying her shoes, Lucky was always close by, as if afraid she might disappear if he looked away for too long. One evening, as Megan sat at the kitchen table finishing her homework, Lucky rested at her feet, his small head resting on her toes. Tyler sat across from her, flipping through a book about different dog breeds. "Do you think Lucky is going to stay small?" he asked, looking up. Megan shrugged, setting her pencil down. "I'm not sure. He's definitely grown, but I don't think he's going to be huge." Tyler tapped his chin thoughtfully. "I kind of like that he's small. It makes him easier to pick up." Emily walked in, drying her hands on a dish towel. "You two should start thinking about what you'll do for Lucky's first birthday." Tyler gasped dramatically. "Lucky gets a birthday party?" Emily smiled. "Well, we don't know exactly when he was born, but we could celebrate the day we found him." Megan leaned down to scratch Lucky behind the ears. "I like that idea." Steve walked in, setting his car keys on the counter. "Speaking of Lucky, I signed us up for another round of training classes. This time we'll be working on recall commands and leash training." Megan brightened. "That's great. He's already doing so well." Steve nodded. "He is, but we want to make sure he's prepared for anything. We'll start this weekend." That Saturday, they arrived at the training center once again. The instructor from before greeted them with a nod, recognizing Lucky immediately. "Looks like our little star pupil is back," she said with a smile. Megan knelt down, adjusting Lucky's leash. "We're ready for the next level." The session focused on getting Lucky to come when called, even when there were distractions. Megan watched with pride as Lucky responded almost instantly whenever she used the command, his small legs carrying him eagerly back to her side. "He really trusts you," the trainer observed. "That's a great bond you two have." Megan felt warmth spread through her chest. "Yeah, he does." The next exercise involved leash walking, teaching Lucky how to stay close without pulling. It took some trial and error, but by the end of the session, Lucky was walking beside Megan with only occasional distractions. As they left the training center, Tyler clapped his hands. "Lucky's getting so smart," Megan laughed. "Yeah, he is." When they got home, Lucky curled up on the couch, exhausted from the session. Megan sat beside him, stroking his fur. "You did great today." Lucky sighed contentedly, pressing against her side. Emily walked in, watching the two of them with a soft smile. "He really is part of the family now, isn't he?" Megan nodded. "Yeah, I can't imagine life without him." Over the next few weeks, Lucky continued to impress everyone with his progress. He had learned to come when called, walk politely on a leash, and even wait patiently for his food. His energy had doubled, and he spent his days running around the backyard, chasing leaves, and playing with Tyler. One afternoon, Megan took Lucky to the park by herself. She sat on a bench, watching as Lucky sniffed around the grass, his tail wagging. A woman nearby smiled as she watched them. "He's adorable," she said, nodding toward Lucky. "How long have you had him?" Megan smiled. "A few months. We found him in a storm." The woman's eyes widened. "Really? He's so lucky you found him." Megan glanced at Lucky, who was happily trotting toward her. "Yeah, I think we're both lucky." As they walked home, Megan thought about how much had changed since that night. Lucky had gone from a weak, shivering puppy to a strong, happy dog. He had filled their home with so much joy, and Megan knew that no matter what, he would always be a part of their family. The air was crisp as Megan stepped outside with Lucky trotting beside her, leash clipped securely to his harness. The morning sun was barely peeking over the horizon, casting a golden glow over the quiet neighborhood. The streets were mostly empty, save for a few early risers walking their own dogs or jogging before the day truly began. Lucky's tail wagged as he sniffed the air, his tiny nose twitching with curiosity. Megan smiled, adjusting her grip on the leash. "You ready for our morning walk, buddy?" Lucky gave an excited bark in response. Ever since they had started their training classes, he had become much better on a leash. There were still moments of distraction, an interesting scent, a rustling bush, a squirrel darting across the sidewalk. But overall, he had improved tremendously. Megan enjoyed their walks together. It was their quiet time before the rush of the day, a moment where it was just the two of them exploring the world. As they made their way down the familiar path, Megan noticed an older woman sitting on a bench, watching them with a warm smile. Lucky's ears perked up, and he let out a small wag before glancing up at Megan for permission. She gave him a reassuring nod, and they approached the bench. "Good morning," the woman greeted, reaching down to pat Lucky's head. "He's a beautiful dog, so well behaved." Megan beamed. "Thank you. He's come a long way. We found him in a storm a few months ago." The woman's expression softened. That must have been a rough start for him, but he looked so happy now. Megan glanced down at Lucky, who was wagging his tail proudly as if he knew he was the center of attention. "Yeah, he's doing great." After chatting for a few minutes, they continued their walk. Lucky trotted beside her, ears perked, tail wagging, taking in every new sight and smell. Megan felt a deep sense of peace, knowing that this was how things were supposed to be. Lucky was safe, he was happy, and he was with her. Later that day, back at home, Tyler was sprawled on the living room floor, stacking blocks, while Lucky sat beside him, watching curiously. Every now and then, Lucky would reach out a paw and knock over part of the structure, making Tyler groan in frustration before laughing. "Lucky, you're supposed to help, not destroy it," Tyler said, trying to rebuild. Megan sat on the couch, watching with amusement. "I think he's trying to be part of the game." Emily walked in, carrying a small box. "Speaking of games, I got something for Lucky." Tyler's eyes widened. "What is it?" Emily set the box down and pulled out a puzzle toy designed for dogs. "It's supposed to keep him engaged. You hide treats inside and he has to figure out how to get them out." Megan grinned. "That sounds perfect for him." They set up the toy, placing a few small treats inside before setting it in front of Lucky. At first, he sniffed it cautiously, tilting his head as if trying to figure out what it was. Then, after a moment, he pawed at one of the compartments, accidentally sliding it open and revealing a treat. His tail wagged wildly as he gobbled it up. "He did it!" Tyler cheered. Lucky, now fully invested, began using his nose and paws to figure out the rest of the puzzle. Megan watched with pride. It was incredible to see how much he had grown, both physically and mentally. When they had first found him, he had been weak, barely able to lift his head. Now he was strong, playful, and eager to learn. As the days went by, Lucky continued to surprise them. His energy was endless, and his ability to learn new things kept them all entertained. One afternoon, as Megan was finishing up her homework at the kitchen table, she heard Tyler laughing outside. She peeked out the window to see him running around the backyard with Lucky chasing after him, barking happily. Emily joined her at the window, smiling. "They've become inseparable." Megan nodded. "Lucky's like his little shadow." Steve walked in, setting down a few bags of groceries. "I ran into Dr. Lawson at the store. He asked how Lucky was doing." Emily turned. "What did you tell him?" Steve chuckled. "That he's turned into a little ball of energy." Megan laughed. "That sounds about right." That weekend, they took Lucky to the dog park again. This time he was more confident, running straight into the open field and greeting the other dogs like an old friend. Megan watched as he played, chasing after a Labrador puppy and rolling in the grass. It was moments like these that made her realize just how much their lives had changed since finding him. Tyler ran over, panting. "Lucky's so fast now. He beat me in a race." Megan smirked. "Maybe we should enter him in a competition." Tyler's eyes widened. "Can we?" Steve, who had been listening, rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "There are local dog events. Maybe we could look into it." Megan felt a thrill of excitement. The idea of entering Lucky into an event sounded like a fun challenge. "That would be amazing," Emily chuckled. "Let's start with basic competitions and see how he does." As they headed home, Lucky sat in Megan's lap, resting his head against her arm. She stroked his fur, feeling a deep sense of contentment. No matter what the future held, she knew one thing for sure. Lucky had changed their lives for the better, and she couldn't wait to see what came next. Lucky's training classes had proven to be just the beginning. Each week, Megan found herself more impressed with what the small, energetic dog could accomplish. The once shy and hesitant puppy now thrived on learning new tricks and commands. Lucky's favorite part of the day quickly became their practice sessions in the backyard, where Megan would set up small hurdles or play games that challenged Lucky's memory and coordination. It wasn't just training, it was a way for the two of them to bond and grow together. One sunny afternoon, Megan stood in the backyard, holding a small red ball in her hand. Lucky sat in front of her, tail wagging, eyes locked on the toy. "Ready?" Megan asked. Lucky barked once, his version of an enthusiastic yes. She tossed the ball across the yard, and Lucky bolted after it, kicking up tiny puffs of dust as his paws hit the ground. He reached the ball in seconds, picked it up in his mouth, and roost back to Megan, his tail wagging furiously. "Good boy," she said, crouching down to ruffle his fur as he dropped the ball at her feet. "You're getting faster every day." Emily came outside with a glass of lemonade, smiling as she watched them. "He's like a whole new dog," she said. "I remember when he could barely stand." Megan nodded, giving Lucky another pat. "He's amazing. He just needed a chance." Steve appeared on the porch, holding his phone. "Speaking of chances, I looked into that dog competition you mentioned." Megan turned, curious. "What did you find out?" "There's a local event in a few weeks. It's not a full-blown agility competition, more of a fun day with small contests for beginner dogs. It could be a good way for Lucky to try something new." Megan's face lit up. "Can we sign up?" Steve nodded. "Already did. We'll use it as a way to see how he handles a busier environment and more distractions." Tyler, who had been listening from the kitchen window, ran outside. "Can I help train him?" "Sure," Megan said, laughing. "The more practice, the better." Over the next few weeks, their backyard transformed into a mini training ground. Steve built simple obstacles, like low jumps and tunnels made from chairs and sheets. Megan focused on teaching Lucky to weave between poles and respond to commands even when Tyler tried to distract him by waving a squeaky toy. It became a family effort, with everyone pitching in to help Lucky get ready. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Megan stood with Lucky at the start of their makeshift course. She had set up a series of small jumps, followed by a winding path marked by cones. Lucky stood at her side, ears perked, ready to go. "Okay, Lucky," she said. "Let's do this." With a simple hand signal, Lucky took off. He cleared each jump with ease, his small body moving gracefully through the course. When he reached the cones, he weaved through them like a pro, his tail wagging the entire time. By the time he finished, Megan was cheering. "You did it! You're amazing!" she said, scooping him up and spinning in a circle. Emily and Steve clapped from the porch, and Tyler ran over, giving Lucky a treat. "You're going to win for sure," he said confidently. Megan laughed. "It's not about winning. It's about having fun and seeing what he can do." The day of the event arrived, and the family packed up the car with treats, water, and Lucky's favorite toys. When they arrived at the park hosting the competition, Megan was amazed at the turnout. Dogs of all shapes and sizes were everywhere, each one with a proud owner by its side. Some were practicing jumps, others were simply lounging in the shade. Lucky, wearing a bright blue bandana, seemed both excited and a little nervous. He stuck close to Megan, his tail wagging but his ears twitching at every unfamiliar sound. "It's okay, buddy," Megan said, crouching down to give him a reassuring scratch behind the ears. "We're just here to have fun." When it was their turn, Megan led Lucky to the starting line. The course was more challenging than the one they had practiced at home, but Megan trusted Lucky. She gave him a quick command, and he took off, clearing the first jump with ease. The crowd cheered as Lucky moved through the course, his little legs moving quickly but confidently. Megan guided him through the weave poles, her voice calm and steady. "You've got this, Lucky." By the time they reached the final jump, Lucky was fully focused. He leapt over it, landing gracefully, and the crowd erupted into applause. Megan scooped him up, hugging him tightly. "You did it," she said, her voice filled with pride. Back at home that evening, Lucky lounged on the couch, clearly exhausted from the event. Tyler sat beside him, gently petting his head. "He was so good today," Tyler said. "I can't believe how far he's come." Megan nodded, smiling at the small dog who had become such a big part of their lives. "Lucky's just getting started." Emily and Steve joined them, settling in with cups of tea. They all sat together, the room filled with a quiet, comfortable warmth. Lucky had proven that with a little love, patience, and determination, anything was possible. And as Megan looked at him, fast asleep and dreaming after a big day, she knew they had all found something special in each other. Life had settled into a comfortable rhythm after Lucky's first competition. The small dog, once frail and timid, had become the center of the household. Megan woke up each morning to find Lucky waiting by her bed, his tail wagging so hard it seemed his entire body wiggled with excitement. Their daily walks, once a slow and cautious affair, were now brisk and joyful, filled with new discoveries and friendly encounters. One crisp autumn morning, Megan clipped Lucky's leash onto his harness and stepped outside. The air was cool, and leaves crunched underfoot as they walked along their usual route. Lucky sniffed eagerly at the ground, his nose working overtime as he followed invisible trails left by the neighborhood's other dogs. Megan smiled as she watched him, marveling at how far he'd come. "Morning, Megan," a familiar voice called out. She looked up to see Mrs. Thompson, their neighbor from 2 houses down, walking her elderly dachshund. "Good morning, Mrs. Thompson," Megan replied, giving a small wave. "Lucky looks great," Mrs. Thompson said, glancing down at the energetic puppy. "You've done such a wonderful job with him." "Thanks," Megan said. "He's been amazing. I don't know what we'd do without him." As they continued their walk, Megan thought about how much Lucky had changed their lives. Before they found him, their family had been happy, but something about bringing him into their home had brought them even closer. They worked together to train him, cared for him, and celebrated his milestones. Lucky wasn't just a dog. He was family. When they returned home, Megan set Lucky's leash aside and watched as he trotted over to Tyler, who was busy building a new fort in the backyard. Tyler turned, grinning as Lucky approached. "You want to help, Lucky?" Tyler asked, holding up a small stick. Lucky barked in response, wagging his tail as if to say, "Absolutely!" The two of them spent the next hour playing and building, with Lucky eagerly running back and forth, fetching sticks and barking encouragement. Megan watched from the kitchen window, laughing softly at the sight. Emily walked up beside her, holding a mug of coffee. "They're so good together," Emily said, nodding toward Tyler and Lucky. "Yeah," Megan agreed. "Lucky's like his best friend." That evening, as the family sat down to dinner, Lucky curled up under the table, his favorite spot. Tyler kept sneaking small bits of food down to him, and Megan pretended not to notice. Steve looked up from his plate, a thoughtful expression on his face. "So," he began, setting his fork down, "what do you think about entering Lucky in another event?" Megan's eyes lit up. "Another one? Really?" Steve nodded. "There's a regional competition coming up in a couple of months. It's a step up from the last one, but I think Lucky's ready." Tyler practically bounced in his seat. "Yes, Lucky's going to win for sure." Emily laughed. "Let's not put too much pressure on him." Steve smiled. "It's not about winning. It's about seeing what he can do and having fun as a family." Over the next few weeks, their backyard once again transformed into a training ground. They practiced more advanced courses, introduced new challenges, and worked on refining Lucky's skills. Tyler loved being involved, and Megan found herself looking forward to their daily training sessions. Lucky seemed to enjoy it too, always eager to try again, always wagging his tail no matter what. As the competition drew closer, Megan felt a mix of excitement and nervousness. She wanted Lucky to do well, but more than that, she wanted him to be happy. The day of the event arrived, and they packed up the car, double-checking that they had everything they needed. Lucky sat in Megan's lap on the drive over, his tail wagging as he looked out the window. When they arrived, the atmosphere was buzzing. The park was filled with dogs and their owners, all preparing for the big day. Megan took a deep breath, glancing down at Lucky. "You ready, buddy?" Lucky barked once, his tail wagging enthusiastically. As they waited for their turn, Megan crouched down beside Lucky, giving him a reassuring scratch behind the ears. "No matter what happens, you're amazing." When their moment came, Megan led Lucky to the starting line. The course was more complex than anything they had done before, but Megan trusted him. With a quick command, Lucky took off, his small legs carrying him over the first jump, through the tunnel, and around the weave poles. Megan called out directions, her voice calm and steady, and Lucky followed them perfectly. By the time they reached the final obstacle, Megan could hardly believe how well he was doing. Lucky leapt over the last hurdle, landing smoothly, and the crowd erupted into applause. Megan scooped him up, hugging him tightly. "You did it, Lucky," she said, her voice filled with pride. Back at home that evening, the family gathered in the living room, sharing stories and laughing about the day's events. Lucky lay on the couch beside Megan, his head resting on her lap. Tyler sat on the floor, petting him gently. "I can't believe how good he did," Tyler said. "He's like a pro now." Steve smiled. "He's come a long way, that's for sure." Emily nodded. "He's not just a dog, he's part of the family." Megan looked down at Lucky, stroking his fur. "Yeah, he is, and he always will be." After the regional competition, life at home seemed even more lively. Lucky had done so well, and the entire family was still riding the high of his success. Megan found herself looking forward to their daily training sessions more than ever. She wasn't sure if they'd enter him in another event anytime soon, but what mattered most to her was that Lucky was happy and healthy. One afternoon, Megan was sitting on the back porch with Lucky sprawled out beside her. His head rested on her foot, and his small chest rose and fell steadily. The autumn breeze rustled the leaves, and Megan felt a deep sense of contentment. She glanced down at Lucky, thinking about how different things were now compared to that stormy night when they'd found him. "Can you believe it, Lucky?" she murmured, stroking his soft fur. "You've come so far. You're the best dog in the world." Lucky's tail wagged slowly, and he let out a contented sigh. Megan chuckled, giving him a gentle pat. "You know it too, don't you?" As the weeks passed, Megan began to notice more subtle changes in Lucky. He wasn't just a happy, playful dog anymore. He was also incredibly attentive. It was as if he could sense how she was feeling before she even spoke. On days when Megan came home feeling stressed or tired, Lucky would climb into her lap and nuzzle her until she couldn't help but smile. It was these moments that made her realize how much he had truly become a part of their family. One evening, as they all sat together in the living room, Emily glanced over at Megan and smiled. "You know, I've been thinking, we should do something special for Lucky's anniversary." Megan looked up. "His anniversary?" "The day we found him," Emily said. "It's coming up soon." Tyler's eyes lit up. "Can we have a party?" Steve laughed. "A party for a dog?" "Why not?" Emily said. "Lucky's not just a dog, he's family." Megan smiled, reaching down to pet Lucky's head. "I think that's a great idea." They began planning a small celebration, something simple but meaningful. Tyler insisted on baking dog-friendly treats, and Megan decided to make a scrapbook filled with pictures from the past year. Emily and Steve worked on setting up a little play area in the backyard, complete with balloons and decorations. It wasn't anything extravagant, but it was a way to show how much they appreciated Lucky and everything he had brought into their lives. The day of the anniversary arrived, and the house was filled with excitement. Tyler was up early, decorating the backyard with colorful streamers. Megan put the finishing touches on the scrapbook, carefully arranging photos of Lucky's first weeks with them, his training sessions, and his competitions. Emily set out the treats, both for Lucky and for the family, while Steve helped set up a small table with a few games for Tyler and Lucky to play together. When everything was ready, Megan called Lucky over and knelt down beside him. "Guess what, Lucky? Today's your special day." Lucky tilted his head, his ears twitching. His tail wagged slowly, as if he knew something exciting was happening. Tyler ran up with a small party hat. "Can we put this on him?" Megan laughed. "Sure, let's see if he'll wear it." They carefully placed the tiny hat on Lucky's head, and surprisingly, he didn't seem to mind. Instead, he sat proudly, wagging his tail as everyone clapped and cheered. Megan snapped a picture, already planning to add it to the scrapbook. They spent the afternoon playing games, looking through the scrapbook, and reminiscing about all the good times they'd had with Lucky. Tyler chased him around the yard, laughing as Lucky darted back and forth, clearly having the time of his life. Emily and Steve sat on the porch, watching with smiles on their faces. As the sun began to set, Megan sat with Lucky on the grass, the scrapbook open on her lap. She flipped through the pages, showing him each picture as if he could understand. "Look," she said, pointing to a photo of him as a tiny, shivering puppy. "That's where we started." Lucky's tail wagged, and he leaned against her, his small body warm and solid. Megan turned the page, revealing a picture of his first training session. "And here's where you learn to sit," she said, grinning. "You were so smart from the start." She continued flipping through the scrapbook, recounting each moment with a fond smile. By the time she reached the end, Lucky had settled into her lap, his head resting on her leg. Megan looked down at him, her heart full. "You're not just a dog, Lucky. You're family. And we love you so much." Lucky's eyes closed, his breathing slow and steady. Megan leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. She didn't know what the future would hold, but she knew one thing for sure. Lucky was her best friend, her partner, and a piece of her heart she never knew she was missing. By the time spring arrived, Lucky had grown into a confident, happy dog. The once timid and fragile puppy had transformed into a beloved member of the family, bringing joy and laughter into every corner of their lives. Megan couldn't believe how quickly time had passed. It felt like only yesterday that they'd found him, shivering and scared in the middle of that storm. One sunny afternoon, Megan sat on the porch steps, watching Lucky explore the yard. He trotted along the flower beds, his tail wagging as he sniffed the freshly bloomed flowers. Tyler was busy flying a kite in the open field beyond the yard, and Steve was tinkering with the old swing set, tightening bolts and checking for rust. Emily appeared with a tray of lemonade and a warm smile. "You know," Emily said, sitting beside Megan, "I think this is the happiest I've seen all of us in a long time." Megan nodded, her eyes following Lucky as he ran after a butterfly. "He's like the heart of our family." They watched as Lucky paused to dig at a patch of dirt, then flopped onto his back to roll in the grass. His sheer joy was infectious, and Megan couldn't help but laugh. "He's such a goofball." Emily chuckled. "And you've been such a good mom to him. I don't think he'd be the dog he is today without you." Megan blushed, shaking her head. "He's the one who changed us. He brought us together in a way I didn't think possible." As the days grew warmer, Megan and Lucky fell into a comfortable routine. They started their mornings with long walks through the neighborhood, where Lucky greeted every passerby with a wagging tail and friendly bark. In the afternoons, they practiced new tricks in the backyard. Lucky had learned to catch a frisbee mid-air and could now weave through poles like a pro. Megan loved seeing his excitement whenever they worked on something new. It wasn't just about the tricks. It was about the bond they were building, the trust they had in each other. One evening, as they sat in the living room, Tyler looked up from his coloring book and asked, "Megan, do you think Lucky remembers what it was like before we found him?" Megan paused, glancing down at Lucky, who was dozing on the rug at her feet. "I don't know. Maybe he does, maybe he doesn't. But I think what matters is that he knows he's safe now. He knows he's loved." Tyler nodded thoughtfully. "He definitely knows. He looks so happy all the time." Emily, who was folding laundry on the couch, added, "I think he feels it. Dogs are so in tune with their families. Lucky knows he's part of something special." Megan reached down to scratch behind Lucky's ears. "And he makes us all better. We're the lucky ones." The family continued to make memories with Lucky. They spent weekends hiking on trails, Lucky bounding ahead but always stopping to look back and make sure Megan was right behind him. They visited the beach, where Lucky discovered his love for digging holes in the sand and splashing in the shallow waves. Every moment felt like a gift, a reminder of how far he'd come. As the seasons changed again, Megan found herself reflecting on all the milestones Lucky had reached. His first training class, his first competition, his first experience with snow. Each memory was a testament to his resilience and the love they shared. She thought about how he'd gone from a frightened, soaked little puppy to a strong, confident dog who brought so much light into their lives. One quiet afternoon, Megan sat in the backyard with Lucky beside her. The sun was warm on her face, and the gentle breeze carried the scent of blooming flowers. Lucky rested his head on her lap, his eyes half closed in contentment. Megan ran her fingers through his soft fur, a smile tugging at her lips. "You're amazing. You know that?" she said softly. "You're the best thing that ever happened to us." Lucky's tail thumped against the ground, and he nuzzled her hand. Megan felt a lump rise in her throat, but it wasn't sadness. It was gratitude. Gratitude for this little dog who had turned their lives upside down in the best possible way. She leaned down, pressing a gentle kiss to the top of his head. "Your family, Lucky," she whispered. "You always will be." As they sat together, Megan realized that while Lucky had come so far, it was the journey they had taken together that mattered most. Every moment, every milestone, every wag of his tail was a reminder of the love and joy they shared. Lucky wasn't just a rescue. He was a blessing, a living reminder of how much a little love and care could do. With the sun setting and the world bathed in a warm golden light, Megan knew that they had found something truly special. Their journey together wasn't just a story. It was the start of a lifetime of love, happiness, and endless wagging tails. The days continued to flow by, and with each passing season, Megan felt her bond with Lucky deepen. It was as if he could sense every mood she felt, every moment she needed comfort. If she was stressed, he was there, his head resting on her lap, a quiet reassurance that everything would be okay. If she was happy, Lucky was even happier, his tail wagging wildly as he ran circles around her, celebrating life's little victories alongside her. Megan had always loved her family, but Lucky had brought something new to their lives, a reminder of the simple joys, of unconditional love, of resilience in the face of challenges. There were days she wondered how she had ever lived without him, this small, loyal companion who had become her shadow, her confidant, and her closest friend. As spring melted into summer, the family planned a weekend getaway to a nearby cabin by the lake. They loaded up the car with fishing gear, a cooler of food, and Lucky's favorite toys. The drive was filled with laughter and anticipation, Lucky sitting in Megan's lap, his nose pressed to the open window, sniffing the warm breeze. When they arrived, the cabin was surrounded by tall pines, their needles swaying gently in the wind. The lake shimmered in the sunlight, and Megan could hear the distant hum of cicadas. Lucky bounded out of the car, barking excitedly as he explored the new sights and smells. Tyler grabbed a stick and threw it toward the water, and Lucky took off after it, splashing into the shallow edge with a happy yelp. The weekend was a dream. The family spent their days fishing, hiking the trails, and sitting around a crackling fire at night. Lucky was in heaven, running through the woods, chasing fireflies at dusk, and curling up by Megan's side as the stars appeared overhead. It was a time of pure contentment, of feeling connected not only to each other, but also to the world around them. One morning, Megan woke up early and stepped outside with Lucky. The world was quiet, the lake still, and the air cool against her skin. Lucky sat beside her on the porch steps, his head resting on her knee. Megan stroked his fur, feeling a deep sense of peace. "You're more than just a dog, Lucky," she said softly. "You're family. You're my best friend." Lucky's tail wagged, and he looked up at her with those warm, trusting eyes. Megan felt her heart swell. In that moment, she knew that no matter what the future held, Lucky would always be with her, a constant source of love and joy. The drive back home was quiet, everyone lost in their own thoughts, still savoring the memories of the weekend. Lucky dozed in Megan's lap, his small body rising and falling with each breath. As Megan looked out the window, she found herself reflecting on the incredible journey they had taken together. When they pulled into the driveway, Lucky stirred and hopped down from the car, wagging his tail as if to say, "What's next?" Megan laughed, scooping him up and pressing a kiss to his head. "You're always ready for the next adventure, aren't you?" The days returned to their familiar rhythm, filled with morning walks, backyard games, and quiet evenings by the fire. Lucky continued to bring happiness into their lives, his presence a constant reminder of the power of love and resilience. Megan often found herself looking at him and marveling at how far he had come, how far they had come together. Megan knew that their journey wasn't just about rescuing a dog. It was about what that dog had taught them, about kindness, about patience, and about the unbreakable bond that forms when two hearts come together. Lucky was more than a rescue. He was a blessing, a reminder of all the good in the world, and proof that sometimes the best things in life come when you least expect them.